Chapter 1, Reincarnation, Socrates to Salinger. Before the chapter starts, there is a Bhagavad Gita verse. So I'm going to read the actual verse and the translation and the purport from that, and then I'll go into reading the rest of chapter 1. So the verse is Bhagavad Gita, chapter 2, verse 20. For the soul, there is neither birth nor death at any time. He has not come into being, does not come into being, and will not come into being. He is unborn, eternal, ever existing, and primeval. He is not slain when the body is slain. So, chapter 2 of the Bhagavad Gita, here's that verse. So the chapter is named Contents of the Gita Summarized. And the purport, which is it was written by Prabhupada when he translated the verses, and he would give a short kind of, talk about what the verse was trying to convey. So purport. Qualitatively, the small atomic fragmental part of the Supreme Spirit is one with the Supreme. He undergoes no changes like the body. Sometimes the soul is called the steady, or kuta sta. The body is subject to 6 kinds of transformations. It takes its birth from the womb of the mother's body, remains for some time, grows, produces some offspring, gradually dwindles, and at last vanishes into oblivion. The soul, however, does not go through such changes. The soul is not born, but because he takes on a material body, the body takes its birth. The soul does not take birth there, and the soul does not die. Anything which has birth also has death, and because the soul has no birth, he therefore has no past, present, or future. He is eternal, ever-existing, and primeval. That is, there is no trace in history of his coming into being. Under the impression of the body, we seek the history of birth, etc., of the soul. The soul does not at any time become old as the body does. The so-called old man, therefore, feels himself to be in the same spirit as in his childhood or youth. The changes of the body do not affect the soul. The soul does not deteriorate like a tree nor anything material. The soul has no byproduct either. The byproducts of the body, namely children, are also different individual souls, and owing to the body, they appear as children of a particular man. The body develops because of the soul's presence, but the soul has neither offshoots nor change. Therefore, the soul is free from the 6 changes of the body. In the Katha Upanishad, we also find a similar passage which reads, Najayate mriyate va vipaschin nayam kutaschin nababhuva kaschit ajo nitya shashvato yam purano nahanyate hanyamane sharire. That meaning and purport of this verse is the same as in the Bhagavad Gita, but here in this verse there is one special word, vipaschit, which means learned or with knowledge. The soul is full of knowledge, or full always with consciousness. Therefore, consciousness is the symptom of the soul. Even if one does not find the soul within the heart, where he is situated, one can still understand the presence of the soul simply by the presence of consciousness. Sometimes we do not find the sun in the sky owing to clouds or for some other reason, but the light of the sun is always there, and we are convinced that it is therefore daytime. As soon as there is a little light in the sky early in the morning, we can understand that the sun is in the sky. Similarly, since there is some consciousness in all bodies, whether man or animal, we can understand the presence of the soul. This consciousness of the soul, however, is, however, different from the consciousness of the Supreme, because the Supreme Consciousness is all knowledge, past, present, and future. The consciousness of the individual soul is prone to be forgetful. When he is forgetful of his real nature, he obtains education and enlightenment from the superior lessons of Krishna, or God. But Krishna is not like the forgetful soul. If so, Krishna's teachings of the Bhagavad Gita would be useless. There are 2 kinds of souls, namely the minute particle soul Anu Atma, and the Supersoul, Vibhu Atma. This is also confirmed in the Katha Upanishad. Anyor Aniyan Mahato Mahiyan Atmasya Jantor Nihito Guhayam Tam Akratu Pashyati Vita Shoko Datu Prasadan Mahimanam Atmana. Both, God, my Sanskrit is rusty. Both the Supersoul, Paramatma, and the atomic soul, Jivatma, are situated on the same tree of the body within the same heart of the living being, and only one who has become free from all material desires, as well as lamentations, can by the grace of the Supreme understand the glories of the soul. Krishna is the fountainhead of the Supersoul also, as it will be disclosed in the following chapters, and Arjuna is the atomic soul, forgetful of his real nature. Therefore he requires to be enlightened by Krishna or by his bona fide spiritual representative. And that's the end. All right. I just wanted to read that because this is like a chapter 2 in the Bhagavad Gita, in particular, makes, it has some verses which pertain to the nature of the soul and the changing of the body and stuff. So I just thought it would be kind of relevant to the first chapter of this book here.
So we are now ready to jump into chapter 1.
This one is, oh God,
Whenever you are.
we're going to have to take turns.
Okay, do you want me to start since you just read the other one?
Yeah.
And you can probably speak up just a tiny bit. Double check a real quick look at your mic before we start, because I'll clip this part out. But see the volume buttons on the side? Tap them once or twice, and let's see other side. Let's see. I would turn it. Oh, actually, you speak pretty quietly, so leave it all the way up. I turned mine down a little bit because I tend to speak louder. That should help since you're speaking here. All right, so I'll start. I'm pulling on my cord already. Okay. Oh, I didn't never clapped, so I probably should just closer to my mic. All right. So we are back to Reincarnation, Socrates to Salinger, or Salinger. I'm not sure how you're supposed to say that. Salinger, right?
I think so, yeah.
He just read the Bhagavad Gita verse that is pertaining to this chapter, and we'll begin here. Does life begin with birth and end with death? Have we lived before? Such questions are normally identified with religions of the East, where the life of man is known to endure not only from the cradle to the grave, but through millions of ages, and acceptance of the idea of rebirth is nearly universal. As Arthur Schopenhauer, the great 19th century German philosopher, once observed, were an Asiatic to ask me for a definition of Europe, I should be forced to answer him. It is that part of the world which is haunted by the incredible delusion that man was created out of nothing, and that his present birth is his first entrance into life. Indeed, the dominant ideology of the West, material science, has for several centuries stifled any serious or widespread interest in the pre-existence and survival of consciousness beyond the present body. But throughout Western history, there have always been thinkers who have understood and affirmed the immortality of consciousness and transmigration of the soul. And a multitude of philosophers, authors, artists, scientists, and politicians have given the idea thoughtful consideration. Ancient Greece, for example. Among the ancient Greeks, Socrates, Pythagoras, and Plato may be numbered among those who made reincarnation an integral part of their teachings. At the end of his life, Socrates said, I am confident that there truly is such a thing as living again, and that the living spring from the dead. Pythagoras claimed he could remember his past lives, and Plato presented detailed accounts of reincarnation in his major works. Briefly, he held that the pure soul falls from the plane of absolute reality because of sensual desire, and then takes on a physical body. The fallen souls first take birth in human forms, the highest of which is that of the philosopher, who strives for knowledge, higher knowledge. If his knowledge becomes perfect, the philosopher can return to an eternal existence. But if he becomes hopelessly entangled in material desires, he descends into the animal species of life. Plato believed that gluttons and drunkards may become asses in future lives, Violent and unjust people may take birth as wolves and hawks, and blind followers of social convention may become bees or ants. After some time, the soul again attains the human form and another chance to achieve liberation. Some scholars believe that Plato and other early Greek philosophers derived their knowledge of reincarnation from mystery religions like Orphism or from India.
That's really interesting.
Yeah. Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. Hints of reincarnation are also common in the history of Judaism and early Christianity. Information about past and future lives is found throughout the Kabbalah, which according to many Hebraic scholars represents the hidden wisdom behind the scriptures. In the Zohar, one of the principal Kabbalistic texts, it is said, "The souls must re-enter the absolute substance whence they have emerged. But to accomplish this, they must develop all the perfections, the germ of which is planted in them. And if they have not fulfilled this condition during one life, they must commence another, a third, and so forth, until they have acquired the condition which fits them for reunion with God." According to the Universal Jewish Encyclopedia, Hasidic Jews hold similar beliefs. In the 3rd century AD, the theologian Origen, one of the fathers of the early Christian church and its most accomplished biblical scholar, wrote, "By some inclination toward evil, certain souls come into bodies, first of men, then through their association with the irrational passions, after the allotted span of human life, they are changed into beasts, from which they sink to the level of plants. From this condition, they rise again through the same stages and are restored to their heavenly place." There are many passages in the Bible itself indicating that Christ and his followers were aware of the principle of reincarnation. Once, the disciples of Jesus asked him about the Old Testament prophecy that Elias would reappear on earth. In the Gospel of St. Matthew we read, "And Jesus answered them, Elias shall truly first come and restore all things. But I say unto you that Elias is come already, and they knew him not." Then the disciples understood that he spake unto them of John the Baptist. In other words, Jesus declared that John the Baptist was a reincarnation of the prophet Elias. In another instance, Jesus and his disciples came across a man blind from birth. The disciples asked Jesus, "Who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind?" Regardless who had sinned, Jesus replied, here was a chance to show a work of God. He then cured the man. Now, had the man been born blind for a sin of his own, it must have been a sin done before his birth, that is, in a previous life. And this was a suggestion that Jesus did not dispute. The Quran says, "And you were dead." The Quran says, "And you were dead, and he brought you back to life. And he shall cause you to die, and shall bring you back to life, and in the end shall gather you unto himself." Among the followers of Islam, the Sufis especially believe that death is no loss because the immortal soul continually passes through different bodies. Jalaluddin Rumi, a famous Sufi poet, writes, "I died as a mineral and became a plant. I died as a plant and rose to animal. I died as animal and I was man. Why should I fear? When was I less by dying?" The timeless Vedic scriptures of India confirm that the soul, according to its identification with material nature, takes one of 8,400,000 forms, and once embodied in a certain species of life, evolves automatically from lower to higher forms, ultimately attaining a human body. Thus, all the major Western religions, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, have definite threads of reincarnation throughout the fabric of their teachings, even though the official custodians of dogma ignore or deny them.
Damn. It's very, like, one of the things I like about this book so much is that, like your grandpa was saying, so his grandfather is actually a disciple of Srila Prabhupada, who wrote the author of these books. So before we got onto the podcast, he was here, and we were just kind of talking a little bit about this, and one of the things he said was that these books, you know, the teachings that Prabhupada brings, he said they were non-sectarian. You know, you don't have to quit being a Christian or being a Jew or being a Muslim or a Hindu or a Buddhist so that you can read these and take the knowledge from them. Yeah. They're for everybody. Yeah. You know, take it, read, you know, because it's super they're very stimulating intellectually, actually, even if you are atheistic, you really don't believe in God. I mean, just reading it to hear the philosophy is fascinating. I mean, it's entertaining, to say the least. But I like how here, just in the last few passages you were reading, he not only just quotes from our scripture, he quotes from the Quran and the Bible, and
he's well studied.
It is very well studied. So it at least
he draws the parallels.
Yeah,
for us.
It's amazing.
Yeah.
All right, the Middle Ages and the Renaissance. Under the circumstances that to this day remain shrouded in mystery, in 553 A.D., the Byzantine Emperor Justinian banned the teachings of pre-existence of the soul from the Roman Catholic Church. There you go. Historical context for why
why it doesn't talk about
Christianity doesn't really, they downplay reincarnation. During that era, numerous church writings were destroyed, and many scholars now believe that references to reincarnation were purged from the scriptures. The Gnostic sects, however, although severely prosecuted by the church, did manage to keep alive the doctrine of reincarnation in the West. The word Gnostic is derived from the Greek gnosis, meaning knowledge. During the European Renaissance, spanning roughly the 14th through the 17th centuries, a new flowering of public interest in reincarnation occurred. One of the prominent figures in the revival was Italy's leading philosopher and poet, Giordano Bruno, whom the Inquisition ultimately sentenced to be burned at the stake because of his teachings about reincarnation. My God, dude. Talk about the Dark Ages, right? You're bringing knowledge to people, we're going to burn you.
Yeah, even if you don't, you're really
Jesus
good
Christ,
mess.
I know.
Wow.
Man. Bruno defiantly proclaimed that the soul is not the body, and that it may be in one body or in another, and pass from body to body. Because of such suppression by the church, the teachings of reincarnation then went deeply underground, surviving in Europe in secret societies of the Rosicrucians, Freemasons, Kabbalists, and others. The Age of Enlightenment. So much reading. I need to do vocal exercises to get the muscles in my neck going. The Age of Enlightenment. During the Age of Enlightenment, roughly the 18th century, European intellectuals began to free themselves from the constraints of the church censorship. The great philosopher Voltaire wrote that the doctrines of reincarnation is neither absurd nor useless, adding, "It is not more surprising to be born twice than once." One may be surprised to note that several of America's founding fathers were fascinated by and ultimately accepted the idea of reincarnation. As interest in the subject made its way across the Atlantic to America, expressing his firm belief, Benjamin Franklin wrote, "Finding myself to exist in the world, I believe I shall in some shape or other always exist." In 1814, U.S. President John Adams, who had been reading books about the Hindu religion, wrote another ex-president, Thomas Jefferson, the Sage of Monticello. I'm assuming that's a moniker that they would give to Thomas Jefferson.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I think so. Is the Monticello, I don't know enough about history, but isn't that maybe it's a building or a town or something?
Maybe where he lived?
I
think maybe that's what they called it.
Is that his house? I was
I
about to say, because it
we'll
sounds almost like his house, but I mean, that could be totally,
I don't
know. Nobody quote us on that for sure, but I think it was something
I remember
like
it
his
from
house.
Assassin's Creed.
There you go.
About the doctrine of reincarnation. After revolting against the Supreme Being, Adams wrote, "Some souls were hurled down to the regions of total darkness. They were then released from prison, permitted to ascend to earth and migrate into all sorts of animals, reptiles, birds, beasts, and men, according to their rank and character, and even into vegetables and minerals, there to serve on probation. If they passed without reproach their several graduations, they were permitted to become cows and men. If as men they behaved well, they were restored to their original rank and bliss in heaven." In Europe, Napoleon was fond of telling his generals that in a previous life he was Charlemagne. Johann Wolfgang von Goethe one of the greatest German writers, also believed in reincarnation and may have encountered the idea in his readings in Indian philosophy. Goethe, renowned as a scientist as well, once remarked, "I am certain that I have been here as I am now 1,000 times before, and I hope to return 1,000 times." It's like a very profound, except I don't agree with the wanting to return 1,000 times. My God.
Yeah, that's a lot.
Less would be nice.
So here's the next one is transcendentalism. Interest in reincarnation and Indian philosophy also ran strong among the American transcendentalists, including Emerson, Whitman, and Thoreau. Emerson wrote, "It is a secret of the world that all things subsist and do not die, but only retire a little from sight, and afterwards return again. Nothing is dead. Men feign themselves dead and endure mock funerals and mournful obituaries. And there they stand looking out of the window, sound and well, in some new and strange disguise." From the Katha Upanishad, one of the many books of ancient Indian philosophy in his library, Emerson quoted, "The soul is not born, it does not die, it was not produced from anyone. Unborn, eternal, it is not slain, though the body is slain." Thoreau, the philosopher of Walden Pond, wrote, "As far back as I can remember, I have unconsciously referred to the experiences of a previous state of existence." Another sign of Thoreau's deep interest in reincarnation is a manuscript discovered in 1926 entitled "The Transmigration of the Seven Brahmanas." This short work is an English translation of a story about reincarnation from an ancient Sanskrit history. The transmigration episode follows the lives of 7 sages through progressive incarnations as hunters, princes, and animals. And Walt Whitman, in his poem Song of Myself, writes, "I know I am deathless. We have thus far exhausted trillions of winters and summers. There are trillions ahead and trillions ahead of them." In France, famed author Honoré Balzac wrote an entire novel about reincarnation, Seraphita. There, Balzac states, "All human beings go through a previous life. Who knows how many fleshly forms the air of heaven occupies before he can be brought to understand the value of that silence and solitude whose starry plains are but the vestibule of spiritual worlds." Let me read that again. There, Balzac states, "All human beings go through a previous life. Who knows how many fleshly forms the air of heaven occupies before he can be brought to understand the value of that silence and solitude whose starry plains are but the vestibule of spiritual worlds." In David Copperfield, Charles Dickens explores an experience that hints at remembrances from past lives, déjà vu. "We all have some experience," this is a quote, "we all have some experience of a feeling that comes over us occasionally, of what we are saying and doing having been said and done before in a remote time, of our having been surrounded dim ages ago by the same faces, objects, and circumstances." And in Russia, the eminent Count Leo Tolstoy wrote, quote, "As we live through thousands of dreams in our present life, so is our present life only one of many thousands of such lives, which we enter from the other, more real life, and then return after death. Our life is but one of the dreams of that more real life, and so it is endlessly, until the very last one, the very real life, the life of God," end quote.
Damn.
That's good.
That is...
The modern age. As we enter the 20th century, we find the idea of reincarnation attracting the mind of one of the West's most influential artists, Paul Gauguin. Gauguin? How do you say that?
You know who talks about
Gauguin.
Paul... I think it's
Gauguin.
Gauguin.
Okay.
Yeah. In Calvin and Hobbes, Bill Watterson, he likes to refer to him in some of his strips. It's funny.
Paul Gauguin, who during his final years in Tahiti wrote that when the physical organism breaks, the soul survives. It then takes on another body. Gauguin wrote, "Degrading or elevating according to merit or demerit." The artist believed that the idea of continual rebirth had first been taught in the West by Pythagoras, who had learned it from the sages of ancient India. U.S. auto magnate Henry Ford once told a newspaper interviewer, "I adopted the theory of reincarnation when I was 26. Ford said, "Genius is experience. Some seem to think that it is a gift or talent, but it is the fruit of long experience in many lives." In a similar fashion, General George S. Patton believed he had acquired his military skills on ancient battlefields. Reincarnation is a recurring theme in James Joyce's Ulysses. In one passage, Joyce's hero, Leopold Bloom, tells his wife, "Some people believe we go on living in another body after death, that we lived before. They call it reincarnation, that we all lived before on the earth thousands of years ago or on some other planet. They say we have forgotten it. Some say they remember their past lives." Jack London made reincarnation the major theme of his novel, The Star Rover, in which the central character says, quote, "I did not begin when I was born, nor when I was conceived. I have been growing, developing through incalculable myriads of millenniums. All my previous selves have their voices, echoes, promptings in me. Oh, incalculable times, again shall I be born, and yet the stupid dolts about me think that by stretching my neck with a rope, they will make me cease." End quote.
Wow, I've never heard. I like Jack London's work. I've never heard that quote, but that's how I believe he hung himself, because he suffered from depression and stuff. But,
oh, wow.
Yeah.
That's
or he died of an overdose. One of the two. I don't remember.
Nobel laureate Hermann Hesse wrote the following in his classic novel about the search for spiritual truth, Siddhartha. He saw all these forms and faces in 1,000 relationships to each other. This is a quote. None of them died. They only changed, were always reborn, continually had a new face. Only time stood between one face and another. End quote. Numerous scientists and psychologists have believed in reincarnation as well. One of the most influential psychologists, Carl Jung, used the concept of an eternal self that undergoes many births as a tool in his attempts to understand the deepest mysteries of the self and consciousness. "I could well imagine," this is a quote, "I could well imagine that I might have lived in former centuries and there encountered questions I was not yet able to answer, that I had to be born again because I had not fulfilled the task that was given to me," Jung wrote. British biologist Thomas Huxley noted that, quote, "the doctrine of transmigration," end quote, was a, quote, "means of constructing a plausible vindication of the ways of the cosmos to man," end quote, and warned that, quote, "none but very hasty thinkers will reject it on the grounds of inherent absurdity," end quote.
Damn.
Interesting.
Like, holy crap, man. The amount of time that he
Spending
put
this-
into, like, referencing and cross.
Yeah, I mean, there's so much cross-referencing happening
It's
here.
amazing.
One of the leading figures in the field of psychoanalysis and human development, American psychoanalyst Erik Erikson, who coined the phrase identity crisis, was convinced that reincarnation goes to the very core of every man's belief system. Let us face it. This is a quote. "Let us face it. Deep down, nobody in his right mind can visualize his own existence without assuming that he has always lived and will live hereafter," end quote, the author wrote. Mahatma Gandhi, one of the greatest political figures of modern times and the apostle of nonviolence, once explained how a practical understanding of reincarnation gave him hope for his dream of world peace. Gandhi said, "I cannot think of permanent enmity between man, and believing as I do in the theory of rebirth, I live in the hope that if not in this birth, in some other birth, I shall be able to hug all of humanity in friendly embrace." J.D. Salinger, hold on.
I know that reading gets to you.
J.D. Goodness. J.D. Salinger, in one of his most famous short stories, Teddy, introduces a precocious young boy of that name who recalls his reincarnation experiences and speaks forthrightly about them. "It's so silly. All you do is get the heck out of your body when you die. My gosh, everybody's done it thousands of times. Just because they don't remember it doesn't mean they haven't done it." Jonathan Livingston Seagull, the eponymous hero of the novel by Richard Bach, is described there as "that brilliant little fire that burns within us all." He goes through a series of reincarnations that lead him from Earth to a heavenly world and back again, to enlighten the less fortunate gulls. One of Jonathan's mentors inquires, Do you have any idea how many lives we must have gone through before we even get the first idea that there is more to life than eating or fighting or power in the flock? 1,000 lives, John? 10,000? And then another 100 lives until we begin to learn that there is such a thing as perfection? And another 100 again to get the idea that our purpose for living is to find that perfection and show it forth? Wow.
Dude, that makes your head hurt.
Yeah.
Oh my God.
That's a lot of lives. Nobel laureate Isaac Bashevis Singer, I'm sure I mispronounced that, in his masterful short stories often spoke of past lives, rebirth, and the immortality of the soul. There is no death. How can there be death if everything is part of Godhead? The soul never dies, and the body is never really alive. That was a quote from the guy I can't pronounce. Nobel laureate Isaac Bashevis Singer. Oh, Nobel laureate is the title. Okay, makes more sense. And British poet laureate John Mansfield, in his well-known poem about past and future lives, writes, I hold that when a person dies, his soul returns again to earth, arrayed in some new flesh disguise. Another mother gives him birth. With sturdier limbs and brighter brain, the old soul takes the road again. Musician, songwriter, and celebrated Beatle George Harrison thought seriously about reincarnation, as revealed in his private thoughts on interpersonal relationships. Friends are all souls that we've known in other lives. We're drawn to each other. That's how I feel about friends. Even if I have only known them a day, it doesn't matter. I'm not going to wait till I have known them for 2 years, because anyway, we must have met somewhere before, you know? For
That's
some
really
time,
cool.
yeah, it's pretty cool. George Harrison actually met Prabhupada, and,
yeah.
and they were quite friendly. For some time, reincarnation has been attracting the minds of intellectuals and the general public in the West. Films, novels, popular songs, and periodicals now treat reincarnation with ever-increasing frequency, and millions of Westerners are rapidly joining ranks with the more than 2 billion people, including Hindus, Buddhists, Taoists, and members of other faiths, who have traditionally understood that life does not begin at birth or end at death. But simple curiosity or belief is not sufficient. It is merely the first step in understanding the complete science of reincarnation, which includes knowledge of how to free oneself from the miserable cycle of birth and death.
Nice.
Losing it.
Yeah, this first chapter is a little long, but there's like a couple more pages left. All right. So, the Bhagavad Gita, the timeless source book on reincarnation. Many Westerners, in order to gain a deeper understanding about reincarnation, are turning to the original sources of knowledge about past and future lives. Among all available literatures, the Sanskrit Vedas of India are the oldest on earth and present the most comprehensive and logical explanation of the science of reincarnation. Teachings that have maintained their viability and universal appeal for more than 5,000 years. The most fundamental information about reincarnation appears in the Bhagavad Gita, the essence of the Upanishads and of all Vedic knowledge. The Gita was spoken 50 centuries ago by Krishna, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, to his friend and disciple Arjuna on a battlefield in northern India. A battlefield is the perfect place for a discussion about reincarnation, for in combat men directly confront the fateful questions of life, death, and the afterlife. As Krishna begins to speak on the immortality of the soul, he tells Arjuna, "Never was there a time when I did not exist, nor you, nor all these kings, nor in the future shall any of us cease to be." The Gita further instructs that, quote, "that which pervades the entire body you should know to be indestructible." And by this, from the purport when I read it, so what it means when he says that which pervades the entire body, he's referring to consciousness, which is the symptom of the soul.
Yeah.
So that which pervades the entire body you should know to be indestructible. No one is able to destroy that imperishable soul, end quote. The soul, here we speak of something so subtle that it is not immediately verifiable by the limited human mind and senses. Therefore, not everyone will be able to accept the existence of the soul. So if we're, so caught up in the material body that we are wanting, you have to kind of approach the topic with an open mind, I guess is, kind of what it's saying. Like if you're only caught up in the physical, you're not going to be able to even start to think about the metaphysical,
Yeah.
Krishna informs Arjuna, quote, "Some look on the soul as amazing, some describe him as amazing, and some hear of him as amazing, while others, even after hearing about him, cannot understand him at all." End quote. Accepting the existence of the soul is, however, not merely a matter of faith. The Bhagavad Gita appeals to the evidence of our senses and to logic, so that we may accept its teachings with some degree of rational conviction and not blindly, which is called dogma. I really like that because, for me, that's how I am. I firmly believe in the faith and, what I was raised with.
Yeah.
But I also am the type of person that I'm very logical. And so when if I can't logically accept something, then if I can't logically accept something or you can't present it to me logically, I have a hard time kind of just the whole thing of, well, you just have to have faith. I'm like, well, yeah, I understand that. But, and that's my ego, I guess, getting in the way. But that's just how I am.
Yeah.
And if you can present it to someone logically, why not do it?
Yeah, it makes sense to go ahead and do it then. I'm just making sure it's not rubbing against your shirt while you're talking. Yank on that cord a little bit down below. Just want to make sure it's not yeah. There you go. Cool, leave it like that.
It is impossible to understand reincarnation unless one knows the difference between the actual self, the soul, and the body. The Gita helps us to see the nature of the soul by the following example. Quote, "As the sun alone illuminates all the universe, so does the living entity, one within the body, illuminate the entire body by consciousness." End quote. Consciousness is concrete evidence of the presence of the soul within the body. On an overcast day, the sun is not visible, but we know it is there in the sky by the presence of sunlight. Similarly, at present, we cannot directly perceive the soul in the body, but we may conclude that it is there by the presence of consciousness. In the absence of consciousness, the body is simply a lump of dead matter. Only the presence of consciousness makes this lump of dead matter breathe, speak, love, and fear. In essence, the body is a vehicle for the soul, or consciousness, through which it may fulfill its myriad material desires. The Gita explains that the living entity within the body is, quote, "seated as on a machine made of the material energy," end quote. The soul falsely identifies with the body, carrying its different conceptions of life from one body to another as the air carries aromas. Just as an automobile cannot function without the presence of a driver, similarly, the material body cannot function without the presence of the soul. Damn. Another awesome thing, the analogies he uses they're so simple, but they explain it without having to go into it.
Yeah.
I mean, it's like, wow.
That's really cool.
As one grows older, this distinction between the conscious self and the physical body become more obvious. Within his lifetime, a person can observe that his body is constantly changing. It does not endure, and time proves the child ephemeral. The body comes into existence at a certain time, grows, matures, produces byproducts or children, and gradually dwindles and dies. The physical body is thus unreal, for it will in due time disappear. As the Gita explains, quote, of the non-existent, there is no endurance, end quote. But despite all the changes of the material body, consciousness, a symptom of the soul within, remains unchanged. And then he refers again to that, of the eternal there is no change. Therefore, we may logically conclude that consciousness possesses an innate quality of permanence that enables it to survive the dissolution of the body. Krishna tells Arjuna, for the soul, there is neither birth nor death at any time. He is not slain when the body is slain. But if the soul is not slain when the body is slain, then what becomes of it? The answer given in the Bhagavad Gita is that the soul enters another body. This is reincarnation. This concept may be difficult for some people to accept, but it is a natural phenomenon, and the Gita gives logical examples to aid our understanding. Again, quote, as the embodied soul continuously passes in this body from childhood to youth to old age, the soul similarly passes into another body at death. A sober person is not bewildered by such a change. End quote. In other words, the soul reincarnates even in the course of one lifetime. Any biologist will tell you that the body's cells are constantly dying and being replaced by new ones. In other words, each of us has a number of different bodies in this very life. The body of an adult is completely different from the body of the same person as an infant. Yet despite the bodily changes, the person within remains the same. Something similar happens at the time of death. The self undergoes a final change of body. The Gita says, as a person, the Gita says, as a person puts on new garments, giving up the old ones, the soul similarly accepts new material bodies, giving up the old and useless ones. End quote. Thus, the soul remains entrapped in an endless cycle of births and deaths. Quote, one who has taken this birth is sure to die, and after death, one is sure to take birth again. Quote, or end quote. The Lord tells Arjuna. According to the Vedas, there are 8,400,000 forms of life, beginning with the microbes, rising through the fish, plants, insects, reptiles, birds, and animals to the humans and demigods. According to their desires, the living entities perpetually take birth in these species. The mind is the mechanism that directs these transmigrations, propelling the soul to newer and newer bodies. The Gita explains, quote, whatever the state of being one remembers when he quits his body, that state he will attain without fail in his next life. End quote. Everything we have thought and done, actually wait, that right there is like, I really like that, you know, the idea of that, because even in this life, right, like you think about something you really want, you know, oh, I want a new house, right? If you focus on that, and that's like kind of what's driving you, right? Or I want that promotion, I want to go to med school, I want to become a doctor. If that end goal is driving you, everything in between you and getting to the goal, you're kind of, you know, you're navigating, and obviously there's going to be obstacles, but if you can maintain that goal, eventually you're going to persevere. Next thing you know, oh crap, here I am, I'm a doctor or whatever. So, you know, if you're able to focus, you know, control the mind, and by controlling the mind, you control the senses. And the senses are, you know, as in the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna says, he compares it to like a chariot. You have a chariot, which is the body, and then the senses are the horses, and they're pulling the chariot, and then the mind is the driver, and we're just the passenger riding in the chariot. So if the driver can't control the horses are everywhere, they're pulling every which way. And then you as the passenger are just like, you're along for the ride, going down the bumpy road. Yeah. But if the mind can be controlled and then the senses are controlled, then when the time of death comes, you know, you're so focused on, you know, this, then even if you do have to take another birth, you're at least going somewhere where that is going to be the state of your consciousness when your next life starts.
Yeah. Well, the more in touch you are with your actual consciousness, too, the less scary it would be to be leaving your body. Yeah. Because you're just getting out of your vehicle and getting into another one. As opposed
I see that at work sometimes. You know, there's some patients every now and then, they're literally on their deathbed and they're not, up until the moment of their death, they're really, you know, they're very at peace. Yeah. But then other people, it's like, it's terrifying.
The more you identify with your body, the more you think it's, because then it feels like this permanent ending, you know?
Yeah, of course, yeah.
It's more scary. I mean, not to say it's not scary, it's scary no matter what. Yeah. Unless you're really, really there, but I think some amount of awareness of that can help.
Oh, for sure.
At the time of death.
Yeah, Everything we have thought and done during our life makes an impression on the mind, and the sum total of all these impressions influences our final thoughts at death. I mean, they always tell you, right, in in the movies or from people's near-death experiences, what happens. Oh, my whole life flashes before my eyes, and I, like things that you remember memories that you never remembered your entire life, and all of a sudden it's like you're watching instant replay, and that's kind of crazy. According to the quality of these thoughts, material nature awards us a suitable body. Therefore, the type of body that we have now is the expression of our consciousness at the time of our last death. The Gita explains, quote, we're almost done, don't worry. The living entity thus, taking another gross body, obtains a certain type of ear, eye, tongue, nose, and sense of touch, which are grouped about the mind, and thus enjoys a particular set of sense objects. You remember that picture I sent you where it was telling the story about Lord Indra, who got cursed to be in the body of a hog? Mm-hmm. And that, yeah. That's it. Like, a pig living in stool is just as happy as a king enjoying the opulence of his palace. Both are just as happy, but one's living in shit and the other one's like,
it's a different life.
Different set of senses, different set of, Further, the path of reincarnation does not always lead upward, nor is a human being guaranteed a human birth in his next life. For example, if one dies with the mentality of a dog, then in his next life he will receive the eyes, ears, nose, etc. of a dog and be able to enjoy canine pleasures. Lord Krishna confirms the fate of such an unfortunate soul, saying, quote, when one dies in the mode of ignorance, he takes birth in the animal kingdom, end quote. So about 23 hours out of the day, if I die, I'm screwed. For sure. And even in that other hour, I'm probably screwed as well.
And it's not easy.
Golly. According to the Bhagavad Gita, humans who do not inquire about their non-physical higher nature are compelled by the laws of karma to continue in the cycle of birth, death, and rebirth, sometimes appearing as humans, sometimes as animals, and sometimes as plants or insects. Our existence in the material world is due to the multiple karmic reactions of this and previous lives, and the human body provides the only loophole through which the materially conditioned soul can escape. By properly utilizing the human form, one can solve all the problems of life, birth, death, disease, and old age, and break the endless cycle of reincarnation. If, however, a soul who has evolved to the human platform wastes his life by engaging only in activities for sense pleasure, he can easily create sufficient karma in this present life to keep him entangled in the cycle of birth and death for thousands upon thousands of lives, and they may not all be human. Lord Krishna says, quote, the foolish cannot understand how a living entity can quit his body, nor can they understand what sort of body he enjoys under the spell of the modes of nature. But one whose eyes are trained in knowledge can see all of this. The endeavoring transcendentalists who are situated in self-realization can see all of this clearly. But those whose minds are not developed and who are not situated in self-realization cannot see what is taking place, though they may try to. End quote. Damn. A soul fortunate enough to obtain a human body should seriously endeavor for self-realization, to understand the principles of reincarnation and become free from repeated birth and death. We can't afford not to. And that is the end of chapter 1.
Okay.
Holy moly.
That was a big one.
That was good. So, basically what I took away from that was I need to read Bhagavad Gita.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, this is something that we really have to read in depth. But I do like how this book is so... I mean, a lot of it ends up being a lot simpler than one might think as far as on the face of it and understanding what he's talking about. But this is so simple and so non-different from so many other, like, ways of thinking and, like, belief systems.
It doesn't...
It's like, it doesn't it doesn't fight with them.
Yeah,
it's
it
just
doesn't,
kind of
yeah.
an additional thing.
Yeah.
Which is really cool. And he quotes so much from other stuff. There's so many, different pieces that he's putting together here
From
for
scientists,
you.
philosophers,
From every
other religion,
every other type of belief system. Everything.
It's amazing.
So it just gives you a lot of ability to kind of grasp what they're talking about. You get to hear it in different words from different perspectives at different times in history. And then if one of them didn't quite make sense to you, maybe another one will.
Yeah. And it just shows how...
And it's super thin.
It's
I don't
so
know if you guys are watching the video and not just listening. It's totally readable.
How many pages?
129 pages, it looks like.
You can read that in the afternoon.
Yeah, and some of that, there's a few glossaries in between some of the chapters, so it's not even quite that many if you just read it through. So yeah, 1 or 2 days, or at the most like a week, even if you want to read it. This is a book you want to read a little slowly.
I find myself when I read some of his books, I have to
reread it.
I can't just pick it up and read it whenever. I need to focus on it because a lot of
you
it
can't
gets
have
really
distraction
deep.
And stuff happening.
And sometimes I
you're
end
trying
up
to think like
rereading
that.
a couple pages because I'm like, wait, whoa, hold on, I got lost here, and I have to back up a little.
Doesn't work.
But I like how. Yeah, he's not saying you have to accept it or you're going to burn in hell or anything like that. It's just here's some knowledge. There you go. Do with it whatever you want to do. It's pretty... I have a whole lot of his books at home that they've been collecting dust. I'm ashamed to admit I wish I would have read them before now, but I'm slowly making my way through them. But it's daunting. There's so many of them, but the more I read, the more excited I am to read more, which is it's kind of cool because you start learning, you start getting the grasp of the philosophy, and then it's it just makes going on.
I mean, it's just it's so simple, and therefore it rings even truer than sometimes when you're reading something and it's hard to grasp, and therefore it seems it's there. But I do think that you would need a quiet area, at least most of the time, where you're not trying to do anything else while you're reading this, because there is still a lot to think about. As simple as it may seem on the onset, it's still a lot. But I need to start reading more. I'm not reading as much as I should be. I have been reading another one of his books.
Which one?
Science of Self-Realization.
Oh, that's a good one. I only just I read part of the first chapter, but then I wanted to finish. There's so many of them that I've kind of started and gotten partway into, and I'm like, no, I need to finish. And then, but that's on my list to read. That is really good. My dad recommended that one too.
But I think we covered it, and his book definitely more than covers it. But before we end for today, I do want to say that if you are listening or watching or anything like that, and you got this far, then let us know in the comments or in a message or however you'd like to contact us what, if you had any feedback for us. Obviously, we're starting out new. Obviously, we'll work on warming up our vocals first, maybe, so we don't have as much problem reading through
some exercises.
A couple of pages. But, anything that you feel would be helpful to us, or if there's something that you wanted more thoroughly discussed, we can attempt to do that. And maybe
that would
in
be
the
cool.
beginning of each episode, if somebody had any question or anything I feel like you kind of glanced over this, or something you didn't understand, you want us to reread one person's quote or something, like Socrates, I didn't get maybe we read it in a bad rhythm and it wasn't as understandable as it should have been. Just give us that in a message or in a comment or something, and we'll be happy to go over that in the beginning before we start the next chapter each week. Or go over it with you one-on-one if it's been a few weeks and you're listening, but at least, we can cover it. But, all right, well, let us know.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
We appreciate it.